My name is Lena, I'm 12. And the last thing my mom said before she left for her out-of-state job was, "This is good for you. You're used to being on your own." She said it like a compliment, like she was handing me freedom, not responsibility. Then the door clicked shut. The desert wind rattled the loose window frame, and I realized empowerment can sound a lot like abandonment when you're the one left inside. If adults can rename neglect into something pretty, who's supposed to call it what it really is? She never said the word abandon. She said things like, "This will be good for you," and "You're old enough now." She said, "I trust you." Those words sounded warm, almost proud. They landed softly, like a blanket. But blankets can cover things. She didn't say, "I'm leaving you alone for weeks." She said, "I'm giving you space." She didn't say, "You'll have to figure it out yourself." She said, "This is how you learn." At first, I believed her. Because when adults use words like that, you assume they mean something safe. I remember standing in the kitchen after she left, repeating those words in my head. She trusts me. I'm capable. This is good for me. I said them slowly, like instructions. That's the thing about nice language. It doesn't feel dangerous when you hear it. It feels reassuring. Later, I started noticing how often adults do this. They don't rename what they're doing to lie. They rename it so they can live with it. Not "I'm too busy," but "I'm doing this for our future." Not "I won't be here," but "you've got this." Those phrases don't change what happens. They change how the adult feels about it. Because if you call it empowerment, you don't have to ask if it's fair. If you call it trust, you don't have to stay in check. If you call it independence, you don't have to hear the fear underneath. I didn't understand that yet. I just knew that the house felt bigger once the words wore off. There was no instruction manual for what came next, no note on the counter, no backup plan written anywhere, just language that sounded complete, even though nothing else was. I started paying attention to how those words worked, how they floated above the actual problem. The fridge didn't care that I was capable. The empty rooms didn't care that I was trusted. The nights didn't get shorter because someone believed in me. Language didn't keep the lights on. It didn't make food appear. It didn't sit with me when the house got too quiet. But it did one thing very well. It made my mom feel like she had done the right thing. That realization came slowly, not as anger, more like clarity. I began to see that harm doesn't always come with shouting or cruelty. Sometimes it comes wrapped in encouragement. When adults say, "You're strong," they might mean it. But strength shouldn't be a requirement for being cared for. When they say, "You'll figure it out," what they're really saying is, "I won't be here to help you." And when they say, "I trust you," that trust often ends the moment something goes wrong. I didn't want to believe that at first, because it felt disloyal. If I questioned her words, it felt like I was questioning her love, and kids don't like doing that. We're taught not to. So instead, I questioned myself. Maybe I was supposed to be fine. Maybe the fear meant I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe needing help meant I was failing the test she didn't tell me I was taking. That's how language works when you're small. It turns confusion inward. I stopped asking whether this was okay. I started asking whether I was okay for feeling this way. Looking back, that was the most dangerous part. Not the being alone, but the way the words trained me not to object. Because when something bad is described as good, you don't fight it, you try to live up to it. I didn't think. I've been left. I thought, I need to prove this works. That's what those beautiful words did. They turned responsibility into silence. And they worked. For a while. But language can only carry you so far. Eventually, reality catches up. And when it does, The words disappear first. In our town, everybody knew everybody. Not in a friendly, small-town movie way. In the way where the same 5 cars passed your street at the same time every morning, and the same faces showed up at the bus stop every afternoon, squinting into the sun like it was personal. We lived on the edge of the desert, in a little prefab house that always smelled faintly like dust, the kind with thin walls and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. The bus stop was a short walk away. The warehouses were closer than they should have been. At night, you could hear forklifts beep 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 in the distance, even with the TV on. The heat didn't just sit outside. It found its way in. It pressed on the roof. It baked the porch steps. It turned the air inside the house into something thick and stale by noon. And in a place like that, you learn early not to be dramatic, not to be needy, not to make noise unless it's something that can't be ignored. People here didn't like problems, especially other people's. If someone's dog got loose, they'd post about it. If someone's truck got broken into, they'd talk about it at the gas station. But if something happened behind closed doors, you were supposed to pretend you didn't notice. That was the rule. The quiet rule. Mind your business. Don't start trouble. Don't become the story. My mom loved that rule. She didn't say it out loud, but she lived by it. She smiled at the neighbors. She waved like everything was fine. She kept our yard looking acceptable. She knew exactly what people noticed and what they didn't. And I knew it too. Because the truth was, I had been on my own long before she left. Not completely. Not like this. But enough that it didn't feel shocking at first. Enough that I had my routines. I got myself up. I packed my own backpack. I microwaved whatever was easy. I learned how to keep my voice down when she was tired. I learned how to say it's okay before anyone asked. So when she told me I was used to it, there was a part of me that wanted to nod. A bigger part wanted to earn it. I wanted to be the kind of kid adults bragged about, the one who didn't cause stress, the one who didn't make their life harder, the one who could handle it. That kind of praise is addictive when you're 12. It makes you feel chosen. It makes you feel safe. It makes you feel like if you do it right, they won't leave you again. The first day she was gone, I walked to the bus stop like everything was normal. My sneakers scraped the gravel. The sun was already bright enough to hurt. A man in a reflective vest stood by the corner, sipping coffee from a paper cup. 2 women talked quietly, eyes darting toward everyone who walked by. Nobody asked where my mom was. Nobody asked why I was alone. They didn't ask because asking meant noticing, and noticing meant responsibility. And in our town, responsibility was something people avoided unless it was written on a form. When I got home, I did what I always did. I locked the door behind me. I kicked off my shoes. I set my backpack down. I drank water straight from the tap because it was cold and because I could. Then I walked through the house and listened. There's a sound a home makes when no one else is there. It's not silence exactly. It's emptiness. The kind that feels like the air has too much room in it. The fridge hummed. The AC clicked on and off like it was thinking about giving up. The walls creaked when the wind hit them. I told myself it was fine. That word came easy. Fine. 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 Because fine was what you said when you didn't want anybody to look closer. And I didn't. Not yet. In our town, if you let people look closer, they remembered. They talked. They guessed. They decided who you were before you got to explain. They'd start with something small. Did you see Lena walking home by herself again? Then it would turn into something bigger. Her mom's never around. And then it would land where it always landed. What kind of home is that? Once a story like that started, it didn't stop at the truth. It kept going until it found something uglier. That's what people did here. They filled in blanks like it was entertainment. So I learned to leave no blanks. I learned to carry my own groceries in small bags so no one would notice how little there was. I learned to answer "How's your mom?" with "She's busy" and keep walking. I learned to smile fast and disappear. It wasn't just my mom who wanted me independent. The whole town did. Independence was a religion out here. People wore it like a badge. They talked about how they grew up rough, how nobody helped them, how they turned out fine. They said it like it was proof of strength. But sometimes I wondered if it was just proof that nobody came. There were moments, even early on, when I almost broke the rule, like when I saw Mrs. Calder outside, watering her plants in the evening. The light was softer then. The air cooled down just enough to make you think you could breathe again. She looked up when she heard my gate squeak. She gave me a small smile. Not nosy, not rude, just there. I stood with my hand on the latch and felt a sentence trying to climb up my throat. My mom is gone. I'm alone. I don't know what I'm doing. It would have taken one breath to say it, but then my brain did what it always did. It ran the consequences. If I told her, she might help, or she might panic, or she might call someone, or she might tell someone, or she might decide I was a problem and avoid me after that. And if she did nothing, if she just nodded and went back to her plants, then I would have said it out loud and still been alone. That felt worse. So I swallowed it. I nodded like I didn't have anything to say. I went inside. I locked the door. Back in the kitchen. I looked at the counter where my mom had left a few things like they were supposed to make me feel prepared. A couple of notes. A few "you've got this" messages. A card that looked official enough to count as a plan. I stared at it for a long time. Our town loved things that looked like plans. A uniform, a badge, a form, a card. Something you could point to and say, "See, I handled it." I didn't know yet how fast a plan could turn into a trap. But standing there in that hot little house, listening to the warehouses beep in the distance and the wind hit the windows, I started to feel the first crack in the story my mom had handed me. If I was truly used to being on my own, why did it feel like the whole world had agreed not to see me? And if nobody was going to ask the obvious question, who was I supposed to call when that card stopped working? The first time I tried to use the card, I did it like I was doing something normal, like I was an adult running an errand after school. I walked to the little market by the bus stop, the one with the sun-faded posters in the window and the bell that always chimed too loud. I picked up a can of soup and a loaf of bread. Nothing fancy. Just something I could open. Something that didn't need a stove. At the register, I slid the debit card across the counter the way I'd seen my mom do 100 times. The cashier didn't even look at me. He just punched a few buttons and turned the screen toward me. I tapped the card. The machine beeped once. Then it froze. He tapped it again. Declined. He squinted at the screen like it was his fault. Then he shrugged, already looking past me to the next person in line. "Do you have another card I didn't?" I had one card. That was the plan. The plan. I stood there holding a can of soup that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. A woman behind me cleared her throat. I slid the soup back onto the little candy shelf by the register, mumbled, "Sorry," and walked out with empty hands. The heat outside hit me like a hand on my chest. I told myself it was fine. It was probably a mistake. Technology makes mistakes all the time. Right back home. I sat on the living room floor with the card in my hand and the numbers printed across it like they were supposed to mean safety. I flipped it over. I stared at the customer service number. I called. A bright voice answered immediately. "Thank you for calling. For English, press 1. I pressed 1. If you are calling about your balance, press 1. I pressed 1. to hear your balance. Please enter your card number. I entered the card number. It read it back to me like it was doing something helpful, like it was taking me seriously. Then it said, "This account is currently restricted." Restricted. Not empty, not low. Restricted. Like someone had put a lock on it. I waited, thinking a real person would come on the line next. The voice kept going. "If you would like to speak to a representative, press 0. I pressed 0 so fast my finger hurt. "Please hold." A little loop of music started playing, tinny and cheerful. I listened for a minute, then 2, then 5. The music didn't change. My life was changing. The music stayed the same. A recording cut in. "Due to high call volume, your wait time is greater than 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I stared at the wall like the number might shift if I stared long enough. I stayed on the line anyway, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. After a while, the call dropped. No warning, no apology, just silence. That was when I checked my phone. My mom had texted earlier that morning, like she was checking a box. "Just order food if you need to. Love you." It was the kind of message that looked responsible if you showed it to someone else. It looked like care. It didn't come with a working card. It didn't come with a backup. It didn't come with a person. I stared at her text and tried to type back something simple. "The card isn't working." But my thumb hovered over the screen, because I could already hear what she would say. "You must be doing it wrong. Or worse. Stop making a big deal out of everything." So I erased it. Instead, I wrote, "Okay." 2 letters that cost me way more than they should have. I opened the food delivery app anyway, because that's what she said to do. I filled the cart with the cheapest things I could find. Then I got to checkout, and the app asked me for a payment method. I entered the card. It spun for a second, like it was thinking. Then it said the same thing the register had said. "Payment failed." I tried again. Payment failed. It didn't even feel angry. It felt bored, like my problem wasn't interesting enough to be an emergency. I sat there in the quiet house, watching an app politely tell me no. And I realized something that made my stomach sink. My mom hadn't just left me alone. She'd left me with a system that looked like control from far away. A card with my name on it. A number to call. An app to order food. It was all buttons and promises. But none of it could look me in the eye and decide I mattered. That's the part people don't understand when they say, "Well, at least you had a card." A locked card isn't help. It's a prop. It lets the adult feel prepared without actually being present. It lets them tell themselves a story where everything is handled. Meanwhile, the kid is sitting on the floor counting cans in a pantry like it's math homework. That afternoon, I opened the fridge again. Half a bottle of ketchup, some wilted lettuce, a couple eggs I didn't trust. I shut it. I checked the freezer. The ice cream was gone. The only thing left was a bag of peas that felt like a rock. I stood there with the freezer door open, letting cold air spill out, like I could borrow it. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from my mom. "You okay?" Just 2 words. No call. No FaceTime. No. "What did you eat?" No. "Do you feel safe?" Just, "You okay?" Like it was a weather check. I stared at it for a long time. I could have said no. I could have said, "I'm not okay." But I knew what not okay would turn into. Questions, annoyance, maybe a lecture about being dramatic. And somehow, that felt scarier than hunger. So I typed, "Yeah, I'm fine." I hit send, and then I sat there, alone, with a locked card and an empty checkout screen. I didn't have food coming. I didn't have a grown-up coming. All I had was a plan that looked good on paper and didn't work in real life. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I found the calendar on the wall, the one my mom used to write appointments on. I grabbed a pen, and I circled the day. Because if this was going to keep happening, I needed something that couldn't be declined. Top of form. Bottom of form. People keep asking me the same question. Why didn't you call the police right away? I wish the answer was simple. I wish I could say I didn't think of it. But I did. The number was in my head like a blinking light. I knew where the phone was. I knew what to say. I could have said, "Hi, I'm alone. My mom is gone. Please come." And then I would have had to wait. That was the part no one talks about. The waiting. Not the waiting for a car to pull up. The waiting for what happened after. Because I wasn't scared of the police. I was scared of being told I was overreacting. In my house, overreacting was worse than being hungry. It was worse than being scared at night. It was this invisible crime. You could get punished for it without anyone raising their voice. My mom didn't have to say "don't call." She didn't have to. She'd already taught me the rules without calling them rules. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us. Handle it. Other kids have it worse. If you grew up hearing that, you know what it does to your brain. It turns asking for help into something that feels wrong, like you're betraying someone, like you're tattling, like you're ungrateful. I stood in the kitchen with my phone in my hand and my stomach hollow, and my thumb hovered over the screen. I could hear her voice before I even pressed anything. Not yelling, just disappointed. That tone that said, "So this is who you are? The kind of kid who makes trouble." I know that sounds ridiculous. I know it does. But when you're 12 and you've been called dramatic enough times, you start editing your own emergencies. You start asking yourself, is this bad enough? Is this real enough? Do I have proof? Because if you call and nothing happens, you don't just lose the moment. You lose the right to complain again. And if you call and someone comes, what if they don't believe you? What if they decide it's a misunderstanding and they leave? What if they send you right back inside the same house, and now your mom knows you tried to get someone else involved? That was the fear behind the fear. People think kids don't calculate. We do. We just calculate with different numbers. I didn't picture a superhero showing up with a blanket and a sandwich. I pictured my mom coming back angry. I pictured her smile in front of strangers and her silence when the door closed. I pictured consequences. And the worst part was, I couldn't even explain why I felt that way without sounding like I was accusing her of being a monster. Because my mom wasn't a monster in the obvious way. She didn't hit me. She didn't scream. She just renamed things. If she left me alone, it wasn't neglect. It was trust. If I struggled, it wasn't a problem. It was character. If I cried, it wasn't pain. It was attitude. So if I called the police, it wouldn't be me trying to be safe. It would be me rejecting her story. And that's a dangerous thing to do when you're a kid and your whole life depends on one adult's version of reality. I sat on the floor by the pantry and tried to think like a grown-up. I told myself, if I can just make it one more day, I won't have to call anyone. If I can just be quiet, it'll pass. That's what kids do when no one has taught them that their safety matters more than a family image. We wait. We shrink. We try to become convenient. I texted a friend first. Just a small message. Nothing that sounded like an emergency. I didn't say, "I'm alone." I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" Because even in that moment, I was trying to protect my mom from being seen, and I was trying to protect myself from being judged. When the reply didn't come, I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me, but it hadn't. It was doing what it always did. It was showing me that if I didn't make my situation loud, it could disappear. So I made a different choice. Not the brave choice, not the movie choice, the quiet choice. I stopped trying to win at being independent, and I started collecting evidence. Because evidence doesn't argue, evidence doesn't get emotional, evidence doesn't get called dramatic. I wrote the date on a sticky note and pressed it to the wall calendar. I took a photo of the freezer when it stopped holding cold. I recorded my own voice when I felt sick, because I knew later I might question myself. I kept every tiny thing that proved I wasn't imagining this, and I told myself, if I do have to call someone, I'm not calling with a feeling, I'm calling with facts, I'm calling with consequences. I still didn't dial 911 that night. I didn't sleep much either. I lay in my room and listened to the house settle, the wind scraping dust against the siding, the silence swelling like it had weight. And I thought, if you were me, what would you do? Would you make the call? Or would you do what I did and wait until the evidence was loud enough to speak for you? The freezer started making a sound like it was trying to breathe through a straw. It wasn't loud at first, just a thin rattling behind the kitchen wall. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, old appliances complain. That's what my mom always said. But the air coming out of the vent wasn't cold anymore. I opened the freezer and the smell hit me before I even saw what was wrong. It wasn't rotten. Not yet. It was worse than that. It was the smell of food giving up. The little frost that used to cling to the sides was gone. The ice tray was just water. The bags of frozen vegetables were soft, like someone had left them in the sun. Outside. The heat in our town didn't play around. It sat on the roof all day like a weight. The kind of heat that made the front steps too hot to touch. The kind of heat that turned later into too late without warning. I stood there with the freezer door open, waiting for it to fix itself. It didn't. I checked the date stamps on everything like that would make it better. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I was running out of safe options, and I didn't want to admit it. The soup cans didn't need electricity, but I was already tired of soup, tired in my bones, tired behind my eyes, the kind of tired that made my head feel heavy when I stood up. I started feeling weird that afternoon. My throat scratched when I swallowed. My stomach rolled even when I hadn't eaten. When I touched my forehead, it felt warmer than my hands. I tried to ignore it. Kids get sick. Kids get over it. That's what people said. Like it was automatic. But when you're alone, getting over it isn't a plan. It's a gamble. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and watched the freezer drip. A slow, steady melt. I remember thinking, this is how it happens. Not in one big dramatic moment. Just a small thing going wrong that turns into a bigger thing. Because there's no one here to catch it. That night, the sky went dark early. In our town, you could always hear something trucks on the highway, a dog barking 2 streets over, the wind pushing sand against the siding. But when the sun dropped, the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was like the air was holding its breath. I made a little dinner out of whatever didn't look suspicious. I chewed slowly, like if I went slow enough, I wouldn't run out. I left the kitchen light on longer than I needed to, not because I was afraid of the dark. That's what I would have said if someone asked, but because the dark made the house feel bigger, like it had more corners to hide in. I went to bed with a glass of water on the nightstand and my phone face up, like it could save me. At around midnight, the power went out. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a warning. It was just gone. The little fan stopped. The hum of the fridge died. The cheap digital clock in the hallway went black. The whole house fell into a kind of quiet I didn't know existed. And then the temperature dropped. Not enough to make me cold right away. Just enough to make my skin notice. Enough to remind me that the house wasn't really protecting me from anything. It was just walls and air. I sat up in bed and listened. No TV, no refrigerator, no streetlight buzzing outside, just the wind, and my own breathing, and the soft creak of a house settling into darkness. That was when the fear got bigger. Not the fear of a monster, the fear of something happening that no one would know about. What if I passed out? What if I threw up and couldn't stop? What if someone tried the door? People like to say, call someone, like it's simple, like your fingers don't shake when you unlock your phone, like you don't hear your mother's voice in your head saying, don't be dramatic. I stared at my screen until it dimmed. No service in my room unless I held the phone a certain way near the window. I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched the black street outside. The bus stop was empty. The warehouse lot was a dark rectangle. The desert didn't glow. It just swallowed light. I felt very small. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to say out loud. Daytime was hard, but nighttime was the test. Because during the day, you could pretend you were busy. You could clean. You could count cans. You could tell yourself you were doing fine. At night, there was nothing to do but exist. And if you were alone, you had to exist with all the questions you'd been pushing down. Why wasn't anyone checking? Why did independent feel like this? How long could a person be invisible before it became permanent? I got out of bed and went to the kitchen with my phone flashlight on. The freezer was leaking a thin line of water onto the tile. I stepped around it like it was a trap. I looked at the wall calendar my mom had hung up months ago. It still had cute little stickers on it from when she cared about decorating. I found a pen in the junk drawer and stared at the empty squares. Then I wrote the date. I circled it hard. Power out. Freezer warm. I wrote it like it was homework, like it was a fact that needed to be recorded. I tore a sticky note off the pad by the phone and wrote, Day without an adult. Then I paused. I had to count. Counting felt like admitting. I stuck the note to the calendar anyway. I took a photo of the freezer with the flashlight glare shining off the wet tile. I took a photo of the spoiled food packages, the ones that had gone soft. I took a photo of the dark clock in the hallway. I didn't make it artistic. I just made it clear. Then I opened my voice memo app. My finger hovered over the red button. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining. I didn't want to sound like a baby. That word was always nearby, waiting to be used against me. So I said what I could prove. It's me, I whispered, because the house felt like it could hear me. The power went out. The freezer isn't working. I don't feel good. I'm alone. I stopped the recording and listened back. My voice sounded calm, too calm, like I was reporting the weather. But calm didn't mean safe. Calm just meant I didn't have another setting. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hands and stared at the dark window. If you were my mom, what would you think this was? A story? A phase? A problem that would solve itself by morning? I didn't know when the electricity would come back. I didn't know how sick I was going to get. I only knew one thing. If something happened in that house, I didn't want it to disappear the way everything else had. So I kept writing. And I kept recording. Because even if nobody came tonight, the calendar would remember. And in the morning, the consequences wouldn't be mine alone anymore. Mr. Hale didn't show up because he was some kind of hero. He showed up because patterns leave fingerprints. By then, I'd missed enough mornings that the office had called twice. I'd turned in forms with a blank line where a parent's signature was supposed to be. My emergency contact had gone straight to voicemail so many times it stopped feeling like an accident. It was just quiet, long, consistent, wrong. I didn't know any of that mattered. To me, it was just my life. That afternoon, The sun was pressing down on the trailer roof so hard the air inside felt thick. The little fan in the corner made noise, but it didn't move anything. I'd been lying on the couch in shorts and an old t-shirt, not really sleeping, not really awake. When the knock came, I didn't jump. I remember thinking, of course someone's knocking. Of course it's now. I waited too long before I answered, not because I was hiding, because my brain had to catch up to the idea that the outside world could reach me. When I opened the door, Mr. Hale was standing there with a canvas bag over his shoulder and a folder tucked under his arm. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't smiling like a neighbor asking for sugar. He looked tired in a way that adults get when they've already seen the ending of a story and they're hoping they're wrong. "Hi, Lena," he said, like he'd met me before, even though he hadn't. "I'm Mr. Hale. I work with the school. Is your mom home?" I shook my head. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask where she was. He just nodded once, like he was checking something off without wanting to. "Okay," he said. "Is there someone else here with you?" "No." I said it the way I said everything by then. Plain. Easy. Like I was answering what time it was. And that was the first time I saw his eyes change. Not dramatic. Not shocked. Just focused. He didn't step inside right away. He stayed on the threshold. Like he was giving me the choice. Like he knew some kids are trained to treat every adult as a judge. "Can I come in for a minute?" he asked. I opened the door wider. The heat rolled out like a confession. He didn't walk around the house. He didn't start opening cabinets. He just stood there and looked. The way you look when you're trying to understand without making someone feel small. His gaze went to the kitchen first. The counter with 2 dirty bowls. The sink that hadn't been emptied. The trash bag tied off because I'd been scared of bugs. The freezer humming and then stopping, like it couldn't commit to being useful. He glanced at the thermostat, then at the fan, then back at me. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. "I had soup," I said. "What kind of soup, canned?" He nodded again. Still no judgment. Just wait. He asked if I'd been feeling sick, if I'd slept, if I knew how to reach my mom. Simple questions. Spaced out. Like he was letting my answers land. I kept waiting for the part where he'd tell me I'd done something wrong, for the part where he'd say, "You should have called someone," for the part where he'd look at me like a problem. But he didn't. Instead, he asked, "Do you have an adult you trust nearby?" The word trust felt too big for my mouth. I thought of Mrs. Calder next door. The way she waved but never came closer. The way everyone in this town kept their distance, like privacy was a religion. I don't know," I said. Mr. Hale's eyes moved to my face again. Not my house, not the mess. "Me, Lena," he said quietly. "Kids don't usually answer like that. Like what? Like it's normal." He said. I didn't know how to explain that normal was whatever happened when no one stopped it. He didn't push me to talk. He didn't try to pull a confession out of me. He just took out his phone and typed something with his thumb, then put it away like it wasn't a big deal. "I'm not here to get anyone in trouble," he said. "I'm here because we're concerned about you." Concerned. No one had used that word about me in a long time. I felt my throat tighten, but my face stayed calm. That's what my body did. It kept me neat. It kept me quiet. Mr. Hale noticed anyway. He didn't say, "Are you scared?" He said, "You've been carrying a lot by yourself." I swallowed. He looked toward the hallway, then back at me. "Do you have a place you feel safe tonight?" he asked. I almost said yes out of habit. Almost protected the story the way I'd been trained to. But he wasn't asking for a story. He was asking for a fact. I thought about the dark after the power flickered. The freezer clicking off. the wind tapping the window like fingers, the way my phone battery dropped like a countdown. No, I said. It came out smaller than I meant it to. Mr. Hale breathed out, slow, like he'd been holding it. Okay, he said. Thank you for telling me the truth. He paused. Can you grab a jacket, he asked, just in case we need to step outside for a bit. My stomach dropped. Am I in trouble, I asked. He shook his head immediately. No, he said. You're not in trouble. He glanced at the kitchen again, at the heat, at the silence sitting on everything. Lena, he said. Adults sometimes miss what's right in front of them, but patterns don't, and neither do we. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He just stood there, steady, like a door that finally stayed open. And for the first time in weeks, I understood something I hadn't let myself hope for. Someone had seen the signs. The county child advocate arrived 2 days later, not with sirens, not with threats, just a quiet knock and a clipboard held low, like she didn't want to scare anyone. She asked my name, my age. Then she asked questions that didn't sound emotional at all. When did your mom leave? Who checked on you after that? Did anyone stay overnight? I answered in dates. I pointed at the calendar on the wall, the one with the squares I had filled in carefully, one day at a time. X marks where nothing happened. Notes where something did. She didn't interrupt. She wrote things down the way people do when they believe what they're hearing. She asked about food, about the freezer, about the night the power went out. I showed her the receipts I'd kept folded in my backpack, the photos on my phone with the timestamps still glowing at the bottom. The voice memos labeled only by the day because I didn't know what else to call them. Evidence didn't look dramatic when it was spread out on the table. It looked boring, ordinary, heavy in a way that didn't need explaining. She nodded as she went through it, page by page. No sighs, no gasps, just time. Mrs. Calder sat across from me the whole time. She didn't say things like, everything will be okay. She didn't promise anything she couldn't control. She just stayed. When the advocate asked where I would be sleeping that night, Mrs. Calder cleared her throat and said, she can stay with me. It wasn't heroic. It was practical. There was a couch. There was food. There was an adult who would notice if I didn't come out of the room. That was enough. The advocate explained the next steps in the same calm voice. There would be follow-up. There would be supervision. There would be evaluations. She didn't say jail. She didn't say punishment. She said accountability. She said consequences. I watched her write those words down. I realized something then. No one had needed me to cry to take this seriously. No one needed me to explain how scared I was. They just needed the truth to hold still long enough to be seen. The file grew thicker as the hours passed. Calendar pages, printed photos, notes from the school. A timeline that didn't argue back. It wasn't a story anymore. It was a record. And records don't disappear just because someone wishes they would. When the advocate closed the folder, she didn't look at me like a case. She looked at me like a kid who had done the only thing she could with the time she was given. You did the right thing, she said. Not loudly, not like a reward, just enough. That night, I slept on Mrs. Calder's couch with a blanket that smelled like laundry soap and a house that made normal noises. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Someone walked down the hallway without apologizing for it. I wasn't alone, and for the first time, I understood that evidence wasn't about getting anyone in trouble. It was about making sure the truth didn't get erased once the door opened again, once things went back to normal. Because normal had already happened. and it had left fingerprints everywhere. They came back 3 days earlier than planned, not because they missed me, not because they checked in and felt worried. They came back because someone else had started asking questions. I didn't hear it from them. I heard it from Mr. Hale first. He said their schedules changed unexpectedly. That was the word he used. Unexpectedly usually means something went wrong, or someone lost control of the story. I watched the calendar that morning. The return date had been circled weeks ago, written in my mom's handwriting. Bright ink, confident. I drew a new line under it. Earlier. Closer. I didn't feel relieved. I felt counted down. Every hour suddenly mattered. I didn't want to disappear from the room when they arrived. I didn't want to be the kid who was sent away for her own good while adults talked. I told Mr. Hale I wanted to be there. He paused before answering. Then he said, "That's your right." So I stayed. Mrs. Calder helped me set the table. Not for food, for the truth. We laid everything out the way it had already been living in my head. The wall calendar came down first, each square filled with my handwriting, dates, short notes, nothing dramatic, just proof that days had passed. Then the sticky notes, yellow, blue, pink, each one marking something small that didn't feel small at the time. No power. Debit card declined. Soup again. I stacked the receipts next. Folded edges, faded ink, dates that matched the calendar without trying to. My phone stayed face down until the end. That part felt heavier. I scrolled through the photos slowly. Timestamps at the bottom, the freezer, the thermometer, the dark hallway when the lights went out. I chose the voice memos carefully, not the ones where my voice shook, the ones where it didn't, the calm ones. Those were harder to argue with. I didn't practice what I would say. There was nothing to explain anymore. The advocate called to confirm the meeting time. She didn't ask if I was nervous. She asked if everything was ready. I said yes. I realized something then. Crisis doesn't make people honest. It makes them efficient. When the message went out, my parents responded fast. Flight changed. Meetings canceled. Explanations prepared. I could almost hear the phrases lining up. She's used to being alone. She didn't tell us she was struggling. We thought everything was fine. I had heard those sentences before they were spoken. They had lived in our house for years. That afternoon, I stood in my room and looked around. The bed was made. The air was still warm. Nothing looked broken. That was the problem. Neglect doesn't leave a mess right away. It leaves gaps. Time without witnesses. Needs without names. I put the folder by the door. Not hidden. Not displayed. Just there. I wasn't trying to catch anyone. I was making sure the story couldn't be moved anymore. When their car pulled up, I didn't run to the window. I stayed where I was. I heard the engine cut, doors close, footsteps that sounded rushed, not gentle. The front door opened. My mom called my name once, too brightly. My dad stood behind her, quiet. I stepped into the hallway. No one hugged me. They looked past me first, at the table, at the papers, at the people who weren't supposed to be there. That's when I knew. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because the truth had already arrived ahead of them. And this time, it wasn't alone. The meeting didn't feel like a confrontation. It felt like a workday. People arrived quietly. Chairs were pulled out. Papers were placed on the table, squared up like they mattered. Mr. Hale sat to my left. Mrs. Calder stayed close enough that I could feel her knee against mine. My parents sat across from me, not beside me. Across. The county child advocate opened her folder and said my name once, just to anchor the room. Then she explained why we were there. No raised voice, no accusations, just dates, concerns, and the word timeline. That word changed everything. My mom spoke first. She smiled the way she did when she wanted things to calm down. Lena's always been independent. She said, she's used to being on her own. I watched the advocate write that sentence down. Not nod, not react. Just write. My dad cleared his throat. She's sensitive. He added, she doesn't always tell us when she's struggling. We thought everything was fine. Fine was another word that landed softly and did damage quietly. Then my mom leaned forward. We were working, she said. Everything we do is for her future. That one stayed in the air longer. No one argued with them. No one said they were lying. That surprised me. The advocate didn't ask me how I felt. She asked me if I had anything I wanted to add. I looked at the folder by the door, then at the calendar still leaning against the wall. I didn't say anything at first. I stood up and brought the calendar over. I placed it on the table between us. Each square had my handwriting in it. Dates, notes, X marks where no one came. Circles around the night the power went out. Time, made visible. I sat back down. My mom glanced at it once, then away. That doesn't prove anything, she said quickly. Kids forget things. She probably filled that in later. The advocate nodded, like that was a reasonable possibility. Then she looked at me. Do you have anything else, she asked? I reached for my phone. My hands were steady. That part scared me more than if they'd been shaking. I pulled up the photos first. The freezer, half melted. The thermometer on the wall. The dark hallway with only my phone light cutting through it. Each image had a timestamp. Dates that matched the calendar without trying. My dad leaned forward this time. We told her to order food if she needed to. He said, there was money. I slid the receipt across the table. The declined transaction was circled. I didn't explain it. I didn't have to. Silence moved differently then. My mom crossed her arms. She didn't call us. She said, if it was that bad, she would have said something. I nodded once. Then I opened the voice memos. I chose the one from the night the power went out. Not the longest one. Not the one where I cried. The calm one. The room filled with my voice from weeks earlier. Flat. Careful. Reporting facts like I was narrating someone else's life. It's 9:47 p.m., the recording said. The lights went off about 20 minutes ago. I tried resetting the breaker. It didn't work. The freezer stopped. It's really quiet. No one interrupted it. No one stopped it early. When it ended, the silence didn't rush to be filled. My mom shook her head. She sounds fine, she said. See, she was okay. That was when Mr. Hale spoke. That's not what okay sounds like in a 12-year-old, he said calmly. The advocate didn't argue. She just asked one more question. How many nights was she alone? My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad looked down. The advocate turned a page in her folder. She lined up the calendar, the photos, the receipts, the memo timestamps. They fit together, without force. This isn't about feelings, she said. It's about duration. She pointed to the dates. Time, she said, is evidence. No one raised their voice. No one cried. The truth didn't need volume. It had shape now. It had sound. It had weight. My parents sat very still. For the first time, they weren't controlling the story. They were reacting to it. The advocate closed the folder slowly. Well, be moving forward with supervision and evaluation, she said. Effective immediately. My mom started to protest. The advocate held up one finger. "This isn't punishment," she said. "It's accountability." I didn't look at my parents then. I looked at the calendar, at the days that had passed whether anyone believed me or not. I understood something in that moment. Right and wrong don't get decided by who speaks louder. They get decided when the truth has something to stand on. Time had stood up for me, and it didn't need my permission to do it. People kept asking the same question afterward. Why didn't I just say I was scared? Why didn't I call sooner? Why didn't I cry harder? Yell louder? Make it obvious I used to ask myself that too. But here's what I learned. In a lot of families, fear doesn't count as evidence. Hunger is dramatic. Loneliness is in your head. Being scared is treated like a phase you're supposed to grow out of. So you learn something early. You learn that feelings are optional, but consequences aren't. When I said I was fine, people heard me. When I stayed quiet, people assumed everything was okay. Nothing changed. Not because no one cared, but because nothing forced them to look closer. I didn't start keeping records because I wanted revenge. I didn't do it to prove my parents were bad people. I did it because every time I tried to explain how it felt, the explanation disappeared. Words faded. Emotions were argued with. Memories were questioned. So I switched languages. I stopped saying how scared I was. I started showing what happened. A calendar doesn't exaggerate. A timestamp doesn't forget. A receipt doesn't care who's offended. Evidence doesn't shout. It just stays. That's the part people miss. Evidence isn't about punishment. It's about permanence. In my house, feelings had always been negotiable. They could be reframed, minimized, rewritten into something easier to live with. But time isn't like that. A week alone is a week alone, even if someone calls it independence. A freezer that shuts off doesn't work better because someone meant well. A child who learns to stay calm doesn't stop needing help just because they're quiet about it. When the advocate laid everything out, she didn't ask how I felt. She asked how long, how many days, how many nights, how much time passed with no adult checking in. That's when I understood the difference. Feelings ask to be believed. Evidence demands to be acknowledged. My parents weren't evil. They weren't monsters. They just lived in a system where intentions mattered more than outcomes, and words mattered more than patterns. Until they didn't. Until the truth had shape. That's why the questions changed. Not why didn't you say something, but why did this go on so long? Not why didn't you ask for help, but who was responsible for noticing? Evidence didn't erase my fear. It didn't heal anything by itself. But it did one important thing. It stopped the story from being edited. It made sure that what happened couldn't be softened into something more comfortable. It made sure I didn't know wasn't enough anymore. People like to think that if a child is really struggling, it will be obvious. That they'll break down. That they'll act out. That they'll make it impossible to ignore. But a lot of kids do the opposite. They get quieter, more organized, more careful. They become easy to overlook. And when that happens, feelings alone don't protect them. Records do. That doesn't mean children should have to document their pain to be taken seriously. It means adults shouldn't wait for proof before they pay attention. But until that changes, evidence is sometimes the only thing that keeps the truth from being erased once the door closes again. I didn't keep track of what happened to get anyone in trouble. I did it so that when someone finally looked at my life, they couldn't look away. Because forgetting is easy, but records don't forget, and neither do consequences. People kept saying the same thing about my voice. They said I sounded calm. They said I sounded mature. They said I handled everything so well. Mr. Hale didn't say any of that. He listened to one of the recordings twice. not the long one, the short one where my voice barely changed. Then he looked at Mrs. Calder and said, "That's not calm." He said it like a correction. Not to me. To himself. I didn't understand what he meant at first. I thought calm was good. Calm meant I wasn't making a scene. Calm meant I wasn't embarrassing anyone. Calm meant I was doing what he'd been taught. But Mr. Hale shook his head slowly. "That's freeze," he said. "That's what happens when a kid realizes no one is coming." I remember feeling something shift in my chest when he said that. Not relief, recognition. Mrs. Calder noticed it too. She'd been watching me the way adults do when they're trying not to stare. She said later that what scared her wasn't that I cried. It was that I didn't. I ate when food was there. I slept when it was quiet. I answered questions with facts instead of feelings. I stayed neat. That wasn't strength. It was efficiency. I had learned how to pack myself away so nothing spilled out, how to keep my voice level so no one would say I was overreacting, how to make myself easy to deal with. Adults like kids who are easy. They call them good. They call them strong. They say things like, "She's fine." No one asks what it cost. Mr. Hale said something else that stuck with me. He said, "Kids don't shut down because they're brave. They shut down because staying open didn't work." I thought about all the times I'd almost said something. The nights I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, typing a message and deleting it. The mornings I thought about telling a teacher I was tired, then deciding it wasn't a big deal. The way I learned to swallow fear before it reached my face. That wasn't maturity. That was training. I had been trained to survive quietly. Mrs. Calder told me later that when she first met me, she thought I was unusually polite. I said thank you too much. I apologized for using the bathroom. I asked permission to sit on the couch. She thought it was manners. Now she knows it was permission seeking. When you grow up having to take care of yourself, you don't assume care is automatic. You ask for it carefully, if at all. The hardest part wasn't hearing that something was wrong with how I'd handled things. The hardest part was realizing it wasn't my fault. I hadn't failed to ask for help. Help had failed to answer. Freezing wasn't a choice I made. It was a decision my body made for me when everything else didn't work. That's the part people miss. They see a quiet kid and think she's okay. They hear a steady voice and think she's strong. They don't see the work it takes to stay that controlled. They don't see how exhausting it is to be calm all the time. Mr. Hale said something else during the follow-up meeting. He said, "A child who sounds calm in a crisis has usually already learned that panic is useless." That sentence stayed with me because it explained so much. It explained why my hands shook even when my voice didn't, why my stomach hurt even when I said I was fine, why I could list dates and times but couldn't tell you how lonely it felt. I wasn't numb. I was busy. Busy managing myself so no one else had to. That's when something changed. Not in the system, not in the paperwork, in me. For the first time, I stopped thinking of myself as someone who should have done more. I started seeing myself as someone who had done exactly what she needed to survive. That mattered. It mattered because survival isn't the same as being okay, and being calm isn't the same as being safe. If you're watching this and thinking, "I was like that too," if you were the kid who didn't cry, the one who handled things, the one adults relied on because you didn't cause problems, that doesn't mean you were strong. It means you adapted. And adaptation always comes with a cost. I'm still learning how to let my voice shake sometimes. How to say I'm scared before it turns into silence. How to believe that needing help doesn't make me difficult. Calm kept me alive, but it wasn't the goal. The goal was to be protected. And for the first time, I'm learning that I'm allowed to want that, even now, especially now. I learned about my dad later, not from a speech, not from a confession meant to fix things, from a phone. It was on the table during one of the meetings, face down, silent, like it had been trained to stay that way. When the county advocate asked if anyone had checked on me during those weeks, my mom answered quickly, too quickly. She talked about schedules, about work, about how everything had been arranged. My dad didn't say anything. He kept his hands folded. He looked at the floor. That was the first time I noticed it. The way silence can take up space. After the meeting, when everyone else stepped outside, the advocate stayed back. She picked up the phone and asked a simple question. "May I see your call history?" My dad hesitated. Just a second. Then he nodded. There were calls that didn't connect, calls that stopped ringing halfway through, and one number mine saved, but never pressed. Later, when he was asked about it, he said something that sounded small. "I thought she had it handled. That was it." Not I didn't know, not I was scared, just I thought. There was a message too, typed, never sent. It said, "Did you check on Lena today?" No punctuation, no follow-up, just a question that stayed in draft. I had spent weeks thinking no one knew. That was easier. It was easier to believe I was invisible than to realize I had been seen and ignored. Because knowing hurts differently. When someone doesn't know, you can imagine a future where they would have helped. If only they had known. When someone knows and stays quiet, there is no future version of that moment that saves you. I replayed those weeks in my head after that. The nights when the power went out. The mornings when the house was already hot. The times I stood in front of the freezer, pretending it might start working if I waited long enough. I wondered which of those moments he had thought about, if any. He said later that he didn't want to fight, that things were already tense, that he didn't want to make it worse. I didn't know how to explain that for me. Worse had already happened. Avoiding conflict didn't protect me. It protected the quiet. And the quiet protected the story they wanted to believe, that everything was fine. People talk a lot about bad parents. They don't talk enough about the ones who step aside, the ones who don't push, don't question, don't interrupt, the ones who tell themselves that not choosing is the same as being kind. But when you're a child, no choice feels like a choice that's already been made. Every day my dad stayed silent. The plan stayed the same. Every day the silence confirmed it. I didn't feel angry when I found out. I felt reorganized, like something inside me clicked into place, and I finally understood the shape of the room I had been living in. It wasn't built by one person. It was built by agreement. By the way my mom used words that sounded responsible. By the way my dad used silence that sounded reasonable. Together, they created a space where nothing had to be said out loud. And in that space, I learned how to disappear without leaving. When the advocate asked if I wanted to say something after that, I shook my head. I had already said enough. The evidence was there. The dates, the recordings, the gaps. Silence had done its part. Now it was finished. If you're listening to this and wondering why this part hurts more than the rest, I understand. Because it's easier to hate someone who acts. It's harder to sit with the damage done by someone who watched and waited. Someone who saw the signs and chose calm over care. That kind of harm doesn't shout. It just stands back and lets things happen. And when it's over, it says, "I didn't think it was that bad." I think about that draft message sometimes. The one that never left his phone. I think about how close help can be without ever arriving. And I think about how many families run on that same system, not cruelty, avoidance, That was the twist I didn't expect. Not that someone hurt me, but that someone could have stopped it and chose peace instead. And I learned something important from that. Silence is not neutral. It always belongs to someone, and when you're a child, it never belongs to you. The order came through quietly. Supervision, evaluations, scheduled check-ins, not an ending. A process. People called it justice, and it mattered. It still does. But nothing reset. I didn't suddenly trust easily. I still asked for help like I was interrupting something. I still apologized before I needed to. Neglect doesn't disappear when a file closes. It becomes a way of moving through the world, a system you learn early and carry forward. The hardest part wasn't what happened. It was how normal it felt afterward. Justice can stop harm. It can't undo the shape it leaves behind. Recovery didn't look like relief. It looked like relearning, slowly, carefully, and asking myself a question I'd never been asked before. What if needing care was never the problem?